in progress.
Good morning and welcome to this week's recruitment discussion with Jump. And this week we're going to challenge what's probably the biggest talking point in the world of recruitment today, the candidate shortage. And how do you find more candidates in such a short marketplace? But I'm going to start today with some brutal facts that I think we should all know. And the following facts have all come from the National Office of Statistics. It's where the REC gets a lot of information for its job reports, etc. And probably is the true barometer of the marketplace here in the UK. And so I've searched these facts today, and all I put in was, a search string, very the same, and just changed the end date at the end of the search string. So I put in a search string that says the following: how many jobs were advertised in the UK in, and then a date. And this is the data I got back, and it all came back from the Office of National Statistics. So here's the genuine brutal truth. So in May to July 2019, the employment rate was estimated at 76.1%. That was the highest joint record comparable since 1971. However, the figure in March 2023 was 75.9%, and that was an increase of 2.2%, from October the last year. But what we're saying though is that in 2019 there was 32.7 million people employed. However, in October to December 2022, there was 23 million people employed. So what it says is there's more people out there being employed post-pandemic than pre-pandemic. Between October 2017 and December 2018, the total number of jobs advertised in the UK had reached 35.2 million. The total number of workforce jobs in the UK had risen in 2022 by 290,000 to 35.8 million. So that's an increase from December 2017 to December 2018 to January 2022 of around about 500,000. So the first time that they'd exceeded pre-COVID levels of December 2019. The number of vacancies in June to August 2022 was 1.2 million, which was a decrease of 34,000 from the previous quarter, and that's the largest fall since August 2020. But the number of vacancies in December 2022 to February 2023 was 1.2, so only 100,000 decrease. It was actually a 51,000 decrease from the quarter before. However, the number of vacancies in April 2023 is down to 1.08 million. So a decrease of around about 200,000. So what we're seeing is a steady decrease in the vacancy numbers, but what we're also seeing is an increase in the employment people in the UK. So what we're seeing is a gap, and it was exactly what we saw yesterday at LinkedIn, wasn't it? That there is a skills gap now between the number of people being employed and the number of jobs advertising, although that is now getting shorter and shorter as the jobs come down. Lots of people start to blame Brexit. So just to put that clear where Brexit stands on this, there were 31.5 million people working in the UK in January 2016, and that was 461,000 up from the year before. There are now 35 million people employed in the UK, so that's nearly 3.5 million more since the Brexit vote took place. So is there really a candidate shortage in the marketplace, is what we really want to discuss, or is it the fact that the press are telling there is a candidate shortage in the marketplace where the stats actually say something quite different? So this week We're joined by the whole of the Jump crew. Dave, Heather and Paul are all here. So let's kick off with question one. We know Heather likes question one. She always shies away from it.
Oi! Don't you be giving me that first.
So, the peak of jobs advertised has dropped from this time last year, and we've seen that. But why are agencies still struggling then to find candidates?
If you want me to go first, Howard, since everybody's going to force me to, I go
Correct.
first. Thanks, boys. So it's kind of slightly different from those stats that you gave, Howard. I think they're great stats, but one of the things I don't think that they necessarily address is the skills gap. So, when you talk in pure numbers, I think they're great statistics, but the issue is, have we got the right people for the jobs? And the jobs are changing so fast. I do think there's a skills agenda that we need to think at. And I've seen some great solutions, actually, with some recruitment businesses getting involved in actually creating skilled candidates for themselves, with education programs and linking in with colleges and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it's partly to do with the wrong candidates rather than necessarily a shortage.
And I'll pick that up from you, Heather, because I think one of the things we were talking about yesterday when we were with LinkedIn was this very point that employers are now going to have to strongly consider, upskilling. So looking at the roles they have, recognizing that there's a diminishing number of people who are capable of doing those jobs, and having to consider retraining maybe existing employees, or taking a good look at the talent pools available to them and finding people with transferable skills, so they have the basic skills, but with a bit of training and development they can be brought into the business and into those existing roles. So I think there's a sort of mindset change that's going to be required in our marketplace. The other thing I think contributing to the issue of lack of candidates outside of Brexit, and I mean, we're not allowed to use the B word very often any longer, apparently. But let's be very clear: Brexit's had a catastrophic impact on the volume of people available for certain industry sectors. We all know that this impacted things like catering and hospitality, for example, and certainly in healthcare areas. Let's be very clear about that. There's no question that Brexit has definitely impacted those spaces. But I think that there's also the issue of the whole baby sort of boom, the reverse of the baby boom situation. That one of the reasons we're lacking people now is that there was less people being born several years ago, which has now contributed to the fact that we have a diminishing number of people available to work. And that's one of the major reasons why the government, for example, are trying very hard to get retired people back into the workplace. There's not enough people coming in at the sort of base end, because there's a lack of people, if you can put it that way, and that's another reason why they're seeking to get more mature people back into the workplace. So you've got a lot of sort of reasons why we've got this shortage, and I think Howard and Dave will probably pick up on the point of the green jobs and so forth, but you're right to say that the roles that are available now, in many instances, people aren't available to do those jobs. They don't have the skill sets. So I think that's a very good point.
I think, that stat, Paul, is that I think there's half as many people born in 1984 as in 1964.
Yeah.
So whether we like it or not, irrespective of the skills, irrespective of the geography, there are less people to choose from. I also think that there is less of an imaginative approach to how we go to find these people, because traditionally we look for the 9-to-5s because a lot of jobs are advertised in that way. But actually those employers that can be more flexible in their approach to hiring and enable their agencies who they are working to help them get those people, be more imaginative in the type of people they hire and for what length they hire. So yes, we know there's a candidate shortage, and it is across most disciplines, but there is very much so, if you think of it in the traditional way, the more imaginative you can be, the better you can be at finding people.
I think it sort of goes to that point. It's that, the stats are saying there isn't a candidate shortage. There's more candidates in the market than there was this time last year, and obviously from 2000 2016, it's significantly more. But I think what I'm saying is right, there is a skills gap that is actually occurring in the marketplace, and it's how we place that. So the question is, do you believe the narrative of what the press is pushing out, or do you look at innovative ways to find candidates? And I think if you believe the negative narrative that the press is pushing out, then you're always going to find a skills shortage. It always gives you an excuse, and it's, why can't I find candidates? And I always say, if you start to use the word why, you're always giving yourself an excuse. And you've got to start to think, there are candidates out there, and it was yesterday interesting talking with LinkedIn. They talked about that green market, and they talked about green skills, greener skills, transferable green skills, and they're looking at all the skills that could transfer into certain marketplaces. And I think that's where we've got to become a little bit more innovative in finding candidates that can transfer into certain marketplaces where there are genuine candidate shortages, but in lots of places, it is re-educating the clients, I think, to understand how they get and attract and retain candidates into their workplaces, and how agencies can help them do that. And agencies have got to look at this and think, your data is growing daily on the number of candidates that you have, but it's what do you do with that data? What do you do with those candidate bases to be able to get back into them? So we need to still work really hard on picking up picking up with our candidate database and picking up the candidates that we can utilise and put back into the marketplace. Which leads us to a second question that was a very prominent question that's sort of been asked quite a lot. Job boards, according to most recruitment agencies that we are working with, are not providing the results that they used to do yesteryear. So why is it that job boards are suddenly failing?
I think everybody listening will understand this very clearly. They're less potent today than they were in the past, and this is primarily because of the advent of social media. I mean, we all know that the recruiter's friend is let's be honest, it's LinkedIn foremost. There are other mediums. We'll probably talk about those later, but LinkedIn is very much the focus for most recruiters. And obviously, we've now gone, again, we'll talk about this later in recruitment companies, CRMs that work very intelligently. We have the ability to reach out to candidates in a way, methods that we didn't have several years ago, where job boards were probably the only place to use to find candidates outside of our own network. So, I think that we're going to see increasingly a diminishment of their status, their importance in our industry in the coming years, not least because of the advent of things like artificial intelligence and ChatGPT and all the other things that we will learn more about yesterday, which are going to absolutely revolutionize our industry in the next 5 to 10 years. So yes, they're less potent than they were. And I think certainly listening to my clients, without naming the job boards, they're also asking for a lot more money for their licenses. And that's probably a result of the fact that less people are using them to the extent that they were. They're trying to find methods of sort of replacing that lost income. So, I mean, I don't want to get into too many politics here, but there's no doubt that they're definitely, I don't want to use the word struggling, but they're certainly not finding life as easy as they had in previous years.
And honestly, Paul, none of us will have, and I doubt actually the people who are listening into us today will have used job boards recently as a candidate. But I had the joy of doing that just to support my son coming into the job market. They're hideous to use as a candidate. The experience is awful. And it's no wonder that candidates are taking themselves elsewhere and saying they just don't want to engage with that process because it's awful.
Yeah, and I think Heather, you're absolutely spot on. So you've got that perfect storm of prices going up and the experience from a job board point of view being significantly worse. Even the basics aren't being done correctly. So therefore, as a recruitment agent, if you can build a really good candidate experience, if you can match well, if you can speak to them and do the basics right, you are doing a lot better than any of the job boards. Therefore, the job board prices are still going to go up because they're not struggling because they're all making plenty of money. But that's not the answer for a lot of recruitment companies, particularly if they're more niche.
And I think one of the other things worth mentioning here is that, increasingly platforms like LinkedIn allow recruiters to post roles in fairly imaginative and innovative fashion, which job boards don't generally do. So, video posts and all sorts of other things that can attract candidates are much easier to do using other methodologies, whereas job boards tend to be pretty mono in terms of the way you would advertise a role. Less imaginative, less innovative, and so forth. I think they're becoming dated. In other words, it's not that I see them as disappearing. I think there's a place, but now there are many other options, and we know that increasingly, month on month, other options are appearing. So they'll have their place, but they'll no longer be the sort of tools that recruiters will depend upon to find candidates. And as you say, Heather, from a candidate perspective, they're not easy to use and not particularly user-friendly in many instances.
I was just going to say, Paul, we've mentioned a couple of times about yesterday, just for our audience. Yesterday, we joined a small group of people on site at LinkedIn, looking at artificial intelligence and its effect on the world of work and the way that we as recruitment companies work. And we were part of a debate that LinkedIn were chairing with about 15 other people. So when we talk about yesterday, that's what we were doing, and some of the stats may have come from that as well.
Not the Beatles song, obviously.
Yeah. But what we're talking about, though, is the candidate journey. What you talked about there, Dave, was the candidate journey, and it's the start of the candidate journey, and it's start of how we engage with the candidate. And one of the things that came out yesterday, which absolutely was obvious, was that we still copy and paste the job posts or the job spec into a post for a job, whether it be on LinkedIn or whether it be on the job boards. Where if you go back to certainly when we started in recruitment, when you had to write into the press, you never put a job board, you never to put a job spec in there. You actually wrote a proper job advert, right. And that's the start of the candidate journey. So we need to go back to writing proper job adverts and not just cut and paste. And that's what we do. I generally cut and paste a job spec and place it around the job boards, etc. We've got to start to write innovative, attractive job adverts which candidates will apply to and start using that. And I think that's the bit. And if you think what LinkedIn said yesterday, 98% of all candidates that we engage with are not right for the job that we are looking for. And yet we then disregard all of those candidates, and there's only 2% that we're using. So if you think about all those candidates that come into our recruitment process, we are not engaging with them on that candidate journey, and therefore they are switching off. And it was quite blatantly obvious that once you start to switch your candidates off, they start to fall out of love with you, the recruitment agency, and never come back to you. You are the necessary evil, as we keep being called. And that's because we don't create a really nice journey. Your journey there, Heather, with your son through the job boards says the same thing, that even their journey on the job boards is really poor. They then come to a recruitment agency and it's just as poor.
It is just as poor. Yeah, it's exactly that, Howard.
So we've got to start to think that we are part of the problem, but we're a massive part of the cure as well. Yes. And I think that candidate journey has to be better and has to be there. And so the question will always be, when does the candidate journey start and when does it stop? So it obviously starts when they start to engage with you, and it stops when they actually disappear off your CRM. It doesn't stop when they finish the recruitment process. But we think, if they're not right for the recruitment process, it stops there with them. So we've got to start to change that candidate journey. And to me, that would start with writing better job adverts to attract better candidates and more candidates.
And just on that point, Howard, one of the things that LinkedIn said yesterday, which I made a big note about because it sort of chimed with me. It's very close to the things that I've been saying to my clients. But they said, you will get a much larger response when you write a job advert on LinkedIn if you describe the culture and the values of the business that you're representing. Apparently, this is the sentiment of working in a business will be a stronger lure than the actual job description itself. Yeah. So the description of the values of what it's going to feel like, to work in that business. And we haven't got the time to go into all the details, but essentially describing the organization you are representing will definitely provide you with, and they were very clear, a much larger volume of applicants than if you simply just described the job description, which I thought was absolutely in keeping with everything we always say. And of course, the only way you can do that is to really have an in-depth knowledge and an understanding of your client. You need to be close to your client, meeting them regularly, seeing them regularly, and so on and so on and so on. But it was great to hear that yesterday. So you bring the job to life through the description of the organization that individual is going to spend if they get the role, a huge proportion of their time working in, and that it will definitely, if you word it correctly, bring more people towards you.
So if we then look at that, the CRM still appears to be one of the most sort of fought against tools in recruitment, but one that is rich with candidates. So why are recruiters then fighting so much against using CRMs of any description, irrespective of how poor they are? Why do recruiters fight against using CRMs?
Do they fight against using CRMs?
I don't know that they necessarily do fight against CRMs. As a recruiter, you want the fastest approach to the best candidates. If the best candidates are on your CRM and your CRM enables you to find those candidates faster than any other method, then the recruiters, I think, will use their CRM. The issue and this is a very general statement, a lot of CRMs don't do what the companies who've bought them say they do.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the issue. You get sold something that is going to be fantastic, and in reality it's very poor or much poorer than you thought it was going to be. So you've got the owners throwing their hands up in the air going, this isn't what I bought, this doesn't work the way I want it. So they're not in encouraging people to use it. You've got people at the desk going, well, how do I attach a CV and how does this invoice work with this? I need a workaround. You then phone the CRM and the helpline's busy, or there isn't a helpline, or the day-to-day stuff of recruitment. So it's no wonder that actually, if you're sitting at the desk trying to find a candidate, you will go to a job board, or you will go to LinkedIn, or you will go to your hot list on an Excel spreadsheet, when actually, your company's paying 120 quid a head for a month for a CRM that doesn't do quite what it's supposed to do.
Look, I'm not going to debate.
A controversial statement, but
Dave Pye, it's an outrageous comment, Mr. Pye. A slur, no less.
I apologise if I have slurred everybody who supplies CRMs. I'm only saying what I hear.
You are entitled to your opinion. You're entitled to your opinion, and you're not necessarily wrong. But I'd just to put some balance to this, just another point worth making, and that is that, in my experience, what happens, and Howard alluded to this point earlier, is that we have on a daily basis candidates entering our CRMs, and as he said, if they're not right for the roles that we're advertising for, they disappear into the bowels of our CRM, and we then ignore them basically. And then when we do a search a year or two later, or whenever it is, looking for certain skill sets, what happens is that the data is dirty. It's not relevant. We've not kept in touch with the candidate. The details that were input into the system, the CV or the data, is old. And therefore, when we run the search, these particular candidates don't pop up. Now, that's our fault, not the CRM manufacturer's fault. It's our fault. We are failing to keep engaged with candidates who are registering, if you can use that expression these days, with us. And as a consequence, we end up with tens of thousands, very often, of even hundreds of thousands sometimes, of candidates whose details are old and no longer relevant to us. There are methods, as we know, particularly through intelligent software, to maintain contact with candidates and indeed identify when people have changed jobs, so that we can update the information sitting on our database. We don't do that. And often what happens is we advertise roles and attract the very same candidates that we've already got on the CRM. Yes.
How many times have we come across that, where you pay loads of money to job boards or wherever it is to advertise roles, and the candidates you end up placing were on your database in the first place?
It's ludicrous.
I just lost count of the number of times that was the case.
And it's not that the clients that we work with, and we're not, it's everywhere. It's not
Yeah,
necessarily our own clients. They're unaware of it. It frustrates the life out of them. We're spending money advertising over and over and over again to attract the very same people we'd already spent money on, but we failed to keep in touch with them. The issue is that particular thing, and I'm not disagreeing with you, Dave, but I think the bigger issue is we fail to keep our candidates engaged with us once they enter the database in general terms.
Yeah,
I
I agree with that.
I think that's right. But I think the other side that we've got to start to consider, unless you're a brand new agency, if you've been going for a reasonable amount of time, you will have an awful lot of candidates on your database, and therefore new candidates coming onto your database will start to decrease if you start to sort of control that marketplace. But we're still obscure in that marketplace because we're not advertising to our own candidates that are on our database, let alone to the candidates that are out there. And therefore, we've got to start to think. And what I mean by, we fight against the CRM because most recruiters, how many CVs are never put onto the database? How many times do we not go into the database? How do we not use it? So we fight against using it. And maybe that's because we've not trained how to use it properly and we're not seeing the benefits and the advantages of that. And I think that we've got to start to really consider that, as advertising for candidates becomes, less productive, then we've got to start to think about where most of our candidates sit. And most of our candidates will sit on our CRM. And therefore, building your CRM and mining that CRM data becomes really important. So how would you get your business to become a CRM-led, and what advantages does that bring? Because we constantly preach about CRM first. So how do you get to become a true CRM-led business, and what advantages does that bring?
I think some of that, Howard, comes in training. So often we implement a CRM, but don't follow up as much with the training, as in it's implemented as a training session or 2 or 3, and then you're left to your own devices. And actually, it's something that needs to carry on and carry on. I'm sure that most companies aren't getting the best out of the CRM that they've got. Now, you take that may seem counterintuitive to what I said earlier on, but most of the products we've got, even LinkedIn as an example, there's so much more we can all do with it that we don't know. So there's a training issue there. To be CRM led, you've got to know that every little aspect of what your CRM can do. I was on site with a client not so long ago, and they were having training on a CRM that they had implemented 18 months before. And that day they learned about 7 or 8 new things that their consultants could do with that CRM. But it was 18 months down the line, and it wasn't an upgrade. It was just they hadn't been told that in the first place.
Yeah.
So
I'm sorry.
CRM led by knowing your CRM.
I think you're right, Dave. I think that's entirely true. I think what happens is when people join a recruitment business, they get deluged with information, onboarding, bring them in, train them, lots of info, and then not followed through afterwards. And I think it's actually, ironically, very interestingly, it's often the people that are most experienced in a recruitment business that know least about the CRM because they've fallen into old habits, whereas the newer people tend to get, fairly contemporary training and often know a great deal more about it than the people that have been there for many years. It's an ongoing process. You consistently have to revisit it, not least because the CRM manufacturers themselves are constantly updating their own software. And so whereas you were trained a year, 2 years ago, you might well have been completely up to speed with what the system can do. Now, 2 years on, it can do things you weren't aware of. I think that's also true, just to come back to an earlier point about our experience yesterday, of keeping right up to date on things like LinkedIn, because we learned stuff about LinkedIn yesterday in terms of searching for candidates that we didn't know. And I mean, I was sitting there watching and listening and thinking, I didn't know you could do that. And one of our colleagues in the room said, I didn't know you could do that. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. He vocalized what was actually going through my head at that point. So I think it just accentuates the need to consistently, constantly retrain people so they're aware of what the CRM can do. I think the other thing here is that, and this is a big marketing job, many of our clients now have marketing managers, marketing assistants, or use external marketing companies. But I also think we need to look at how we can use technology, particularly, to embed processes into our businesses to ensure that we consistently contact and keep engaged candidates who have touched our business in one shape or form, whether we've placed them in jobs or whether they've slipped through the net for whatever reason and are sitting on our CRM. We need to keep candidates engaged with our businesses so that when
let's just park that conversation there, Paul, because we go back to why a CRM-led business, and we'll talk about the candidate journey a little bit later on. To me, I think it's right what people are saying, that the CRM companies don't inform you of new functionality, etc., etc. And I think we've got into this process that everyone thinks that it's an intuitive system and therefore everyone will pick it up. However, it's not intuitive. It needs training and it needs developing for people to actually maximize the process. And it's only those people that are really inquisitive about any technology that it becomes intuitive and they find how to do different things with it. And therefore, we've got to really work hard at training and developing. And you're right, the CRM providers are pretty poor because they provide generic vanilla training to get you on board, and then it's left to yourself. So you've got to invest your time to become really good. And it's quite often sometimes when I'm talking to clients and they say, we're going to change CRMs, and I instant comment is, right, okay, what are you looking at? What are you doing? Why are you doing that, etc. And some of the times I go, why not go back to your current provider? Because before you change your CRM, you're going to have to upgrade everything, update all your data, etc., and get them to train you on the system. They suddenly find it can do so much more than they thought it could actually do. Yes, some of it costs sometimes, etc., but it's an opportunity. But it is about you upskilling yourselves, I think, on your CRM. And to do that, you will then lead to finding more candidates. And that goes back to your point then, Paul, about developing candidate relationships. And I think as the world of work changes and social media becomes sort of the font of most things, LinkedIn is already the leading source of candidates for many recruitment agencies. So when we start to think about what other mediums can we start to use to yield candidates from, where else can we find candidates? We know they're on our CRM, we're just too lazy to go find them. Where else can we find candidates from besides the job boards and the CRM?
I mean, it's changing literally constantly. I've got clients now that get a lot of results from Facebook, for example. In certain areas, in certain sectors, they get massive response from Facebook groups, particularly locally, from the perspective of looking for local staff. I think it's, you're looking at all of the usual things that we're very aware of, TikTok and so forth. I mean, I know that, I would freely admit, at the age of 66, that my knowledge of all of these new platforms is at best pretty vague. I don't use many of them. I'm an old git, basically. I'm not on TikTok, but the people that work in our industry, many of them, as you're well aware, are in their 20s and are very acutely aware of these social media platforms. They use them personally.
And are having real success with them.
Exactly.
TikTok for generating candidates.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I think the answer is use the people in your business, ask them. Make sure they're involved in these conversations. Your question's a great one, Howard. I think the people working for us probably would provide far better answers than we can. They're out there. We do need to make sure that you can't dismiss these social media platforms outside of LinkedIn and say they don't work. You'll find the people working in your business believe they do work, and I think you need to be talking constantly to those people that you work alongside.
Yeah. I mean, one of our clients, Paul, to that point, old method, but they made 11 placements in 2022 from referrals.
Yeah.
And the average fee is £8,500, so they're more professional services led. But that's out of the best part of 100 grand just from referrals.
Yeah, I couldn't agree.
Intelligent referral program. And that would have paid for their CRM. I don't know exactly what the CRM costs were, but that would have paid for their CRM just on that referral. So you've just got to think a little bit outside the box and go back to basics as well. If you know your candidates and if they've had a good experience, I recommend you.
Such a great point you make, Dave.
I think it's.
Yeah.
I think
Sorry,
it's
Simon.
I think it's simpler than that to a certain degree, isn't it? I think if you know where your candidates hang out, then why aren't you marketing and advertising and creating rapport in that area? Because if that's where your candidates are hanging out, you should surely be in that same area. And it's only the same when you go back to old school recruitment. We used to go to find all the pubs that would be outside all the big tech houses because that's where all the developers would be hanging out at lunchtime and on an evening. So we go and infiltrate the pub, find all the tech people, collect all the information, and off we go and start to market to those people. So find out where your candidates hang out socially, whether that's on social media. They'll be hanging out on your CRM, but we're not engaging. We don't create it as a social media platform, but it is a platform that we should be creating as a communicated platform. But Facebook, Instagram, they're all over these places, but so are your clients. So we've got to start to think that if we can develop our marketplace in there and our presence in that marketplace, then that elevates our social presence. And if we're elevating our social presence, then it will drive more candidates towards us. So we've got to become there. And what your comment there, Paul, is absolutely right. We are old gits. Now, I'm not saying that our clientele people on this marketplace and people on this webinar are all gits, but lots of people who run recruitment agencies are of a certain age where they don't think about social media because they're not on it, they don't use it, and they don't
Exactly.
And I remember point blankly Len Cray coming into our offices at Lorient and shouting, "Who's heard of this email malarkey? This is never going to take off. This is ridiculous." And that was his comment. Who's heard of this email malarkey? It's ridiculous. It's never going to take off. And it was just like, we all sat there as young lads going, "Are you having a laugh?" So we're talking about embracing younger people and getting them to find out where they would be hanging out. And to me, I'm thinking, right, how do I market into that marketplace?
Yeah, exactly.
What do I do to get into that marketplace? And I think that leads to another question.
Howard, just before you get to the next question, just a couple of quick points just to finish this point off. And that is to pick up Dave's point. It's called old school recruitment for a very sound reason. It works. So, we're talking here about technology and all the things going on. Absolutely. Everything you've just said, completely agree with. But back to Dave's point, do the basics, please. Network. Make sure you're looking consistently for referrals and recommendations with every candidate you speak to, and in particular, the people we place in jobs, and use that information. It doesn't happen very often in recruitment businesses, in the same way that when I talk about backfilling to clients, it drives me up the wall that it doesn't happen to the degree it should. So do the basics. Keep in mind the reason why we call it old school. It works. The second thing, and we haven't said it unbelievably, is ChatGPT. Even though we've been talking about what new mediums are available. Everybody there's so much talk about it. We learned even more about it yesterday at LinkedIn. There's no doubt whatsoever that ChatGPT and products like ChatGPT are going to be enormous methods of finding candidates that we don't even understand properly at this point. I'm just going to bring that in.
It's interesting that you talk about ChatGPT, and I think whether it can find candidates or not, because all it does is search the internet. So it should be able to find candidates that are on the internet, but if not on the internet, whether it'll be able to find them or not. But what they're saying about ChatGPT at the moment is that it has an IQ of 150. Einstein had an IQ of 155. This is 6 months old. They're saying within another 6 months, it will have doubled its IQ.
That's Dave Pye's IQ, isn't it? So, it'll be up to Dave Pye's IQ.
We have to stay in touch with this stuff. It's moving so fast.
So we've got to
move so fast. We've got to.
Yeah.
We've got to move it forward and start to think we are using all of these tools. And that, again, goes back to not about using every piece of technology, using the right piece of technology, but training yourself to use that technology properly. And that's the bit we don't train ourselves properly. So we spend an awful lot of time and energy and resources marketing to clients. What would a candidate marketing strategy look like? Because really that's the bit that actually makes us money, are the candidates. So what should you be doing as a candidate marketing strategy? We've already talked about find out where your candidates are residing, socially, etc. How would you start to market to those candidates?
Firstly, I think all professional marketeers would say that you cannot send out very often anyway, generic messaging or generic e-shots or through your CRM. You have to divide. You have to constantly split and divide. I think we all know it's really annoying. We all get them, to receive emails, for example, talking to us about roles or things that are simply of no interest to us whatsoever. It's just really annoying and irritating. If you're going to be effective with the methods that you use to keep in touch with candidates, then what you send to them needs to be relevant to them. So if you have a massive candidate database, there may be some generic messages you can send, but in general terms, you're going to have to split it down so that you make sure that your messaging is relevant to the audience, because otherwise it's a great way of really annoying people and driving them further away from you rather than towards you. Again, why it's so important to begin to use technology to help you to do that, I think. It's a multifaceted approach. There's no easy quick answer to give you, Howard, but in terms of linking in with people, making sure that we market correctly to candidates, it's a multifaceted marketing strategy, and it needs an awful lot of work, and you have to embed it into your systems. It cannot be used as something you remember to do from time to time. There needs to be methodologies and technologies that help you to do it effectively.
And we can't talk about candidate journeys and candidate shortage and candidate attraction without talking about DE&I. So, are we looking at our marketing in terms of the different pools of candidates that we're maybe missing because we're not marketing to specific groups of people? So there needs to be a DE&I element to it in terms of where are your candidates hanging out? Are we only looking at one kind of candidate, or are there multiple kinds of candidates? But also, is your candidate journey working for everyone? So are there people who are neurodiverse or have a physical disability, or, for whatever reason, your candidate journey is not working for them? Is there something you can do about that so that you're not losing candidates because of the way in which you address DE&I?
Yeah, I think candidates want three things, don't they? They want to be treated with courtesy and respect. They want jobs, and they want education about what's going on in their market. And if we can build a marketing strategy for candidates around those three things, courtesy is a given, but for many, we forget that. Education, we educate our clients with information. So if we can educate candidates as well, then that is to our benefit. And obviously jobs, if we've got the right jobs or the best jobs or the jobs that the candidates want, then that's a really good tool as a part of a marketing strategy to build on. So I would focus on those three things.
And I think, just to endorse your point, we know this from a client perspective, but it's also true of candidates. They want data, they want information about their markets, about what's going on in their particular areas of expertise. It cannot just be about, here's a great job, would you be interested? It really needs to have a lot more depth. Because let's be honest, people aren't looking for new jobs every week, but you want them to be engaged with your business on a regular basis. So you need to provide them with more information other than here's a current role that might be of great interest to you. It has to be deeper and more interesting than that.
Well, I think the candidate market strategy isn't about, there's two types of strategy. There's a strategy about, here's the job, do you want to fill this job? That's one marketing strategy. But candidate attraction strategy and candidate engagement strategy is completely different. So when we start to think about that social strategy to engage your candidates, it is about talking. Remember, you don't know whether the candidate is a candidate or a client when you're sort of going into these platforms. And therefore, it should be about educating what the candidate wants to hear and wants to see. Now, why do most candidates go onto social media? Because they're probably nosy and looking for news and looking for things to read. And if you're posting jobs, then they're not interested in reading most of those jobs. So what's happening in the marketplace, what's happening in your market, geographically, niche, etc., etc., these are the things that we should be talking to our candidates about and engaging our candidates with, because these are the things that candidates want to read, and therefore you become a font of knowledge. And you talk about being a key person of influence in your marketplace, you think about the candidates on your CRM and then think about the number of candidates in your marketplace. The number of candidates on your CRM is minuscule, hence you are obscure to the rest of the marketplace. But you start to advertise properly on social media and use social media, then you could be in touch with virtually every candidate in the marketplace if you do it properly. But you have to do things that are engaging, things that are educational, things that people want to read, not just post jobs. And we've got to get away from that very, very quickly and understand there is a huge difference between posting jobs as a marketing strategy and engaging with your clientele as a strategy, your clientele being your candidates and your clients. And I think that's the bit that we've got to really sort of move away from.
Just the last point on that, sorry, quickly, Howard, just the one word, video. Can we please start using a lot more video content? You know, we know that, especially in inverted commas, the younger generation refer to videos consistently. The biggest TV channel in the world is YouTube. So can we please, as an industry, start to use videos far more? I mean, all of the time. I mean, it's about as analog as it gets that we're actually still writing a lot of stuff. We should be using video content in all its various methods as often as we can, because it is tremendously effective. And we know that it attracts a lot more people.
Well, if you just sit and watch your kids on an evening, they are just constantly on their phone watching videos, watching things like that. And YouTube is the biggest social media platform by a long way.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to do that. So I'll challenge that back to all of the Jump people on here and most of our clients. We should be using more video to promote our own services and do that as well. Last question.
What are we doing now then?
Last question. What is the future of candidate attraction and management for recruitment agencies in the next 3 years?
Like that's the answer to that is that's another whole webinar rather than a kind of pithy 1 minute answer. It's a huge issue. I mean, I think the fact is you've just got to have a candidate strategy. You know, that's the first thing to think about in the next 3 years. Actually, think about the next few weeks. Think about developing a candidate strategy. Attraction and management. What does that look like for your business? How would it engage? And involve as many of your people as you can, because it doesn't matter your size of company, you're going to have people aged between 21 and 71, I guess, in your company. So part of my advice would be get them all together and talk about it. Talk about developing a strategy and include the people on the margins that we don't often think about, which they shouldn't be on the margins, but they are. So get them involved as well.
I mean, just to close the circle from where we started at the beginning with Howard's statos, I'm going back to that. The fact is, candidate shortages are not going to go away. It's here for a very long time. This isn't going to pass in the next few years. We are a country now that's going to have a skills shortage or shortages for many years to come. So this is the number one issue for every recruitment business. And I'm going to use two words: passive candidates. Our worth to our employers is our ability to identify people who are not on the job market. They're not on those lovely job boards we spoke about earlier. They are people who are perhaps perfectly comfortable and happy in their current jobs. Our positioning is all about engaging candidates so that when we pick up roles, we can identify people in the market, not on the market, who would be of great interest to our clients. That's what it's all about. And that has to form the basis of any future marketing strategies over the next 3 years for every recruitment company.
And I think that sort of says it all, doesn't it? That candidate engagement is really important, because we go back to what we talked about at the beginning. I think we use candidates as a throwaway product. We use them once. If they're not right, we throw them away, and then we never re-engage with them. It's about engaging and creating a true relationship like we do with our clients, or like we try with our clients. And having that candidate strategy is really important, and what we do with that. And that might sort of drive an extra layer of cost into your business, but that extra layer of cost maybe reduce a massive cost on using stuff like job boards, etc., because you may be bringing candidates to you more frequently that are better for the jobs that you're working with, because you're genuinely engaging with them in a more productive way rather than just a very transactional way when we have a job. And I think we've got to really understand that the market is changing, and we have to change our habits to match our candidates and our clients to ensure that we are approaching the right marketplace constantly rather than scraping the top of the marketplace where the candidates are looking. We have to go into that marketplace, the passive marketplace, and properly work it. And every recruitment agency says, oh, we work the passive marketplace. No, we don't. We do not work the passive marketplace. We play at work in the passive marketplace. We have to do something more significant when it comes to marketing to attract, retain, and engage those candidates that are, have engaged with us through some form of means.
And just as an aside, we learned yesterday that LinkedIn grows by 2 members every second. So while we have been speaking, 2,784 people have joined LinkedIn. And
That's a cracking stat.
That's a great stat. Yeah.
Another 12 have joined while I was telling you how many had joined.
And I just to add to all of that is your strategy for your candidates got to be dynamic. The pace of change has been really, really fast for the last 3 years. The next 3 years are going to be astonishing. Absolutely. Buckle in and just watch what happens with technology, with marketing, with candidates, with the marketplace in the next 3 years. What a ride it's going to be, but it's got to be dynamic.
We learned yesterday about a piece of technology, and I'm going to try find what piece of technology it is, that is already reviewing what consultants, and it was a sales consultant, it wasn't a recruitment consultant, what consultants are saying on the phone, and then analysing how the client is buying. And what it does then is then create the perfect script for every single consultant. So there's already AI out there that's sort of looking at the best recruitment people or the best sales people, analysing what they're saying, and then creating a script for everybody else to follow. That's how fast the market's moving. We were writing that still for quite lots of people. That is now starting to happen electronically, seeing where they are. Why is the £1 million biller a £1 million biller? What do they do that's slightly different when they engage with the client? And therefore, can we then replicate that right across the board? So you're right, it's moving in a massive way. Next week, we're going to challenge a completely different side to the same coin. This week, we're doing candidate attraction and etc. Next week, we're going to look at how do we fill more jobs. How do we fill more jobs? How do we go on to fill more jobs? And I think, again, more jobs are coming in, as we're seeing that there's still, jobs are massively high, the numbers are high, so how do we fill more jobs? And the answer isn't just finding more candidates. There's lots of things that we can do to fill more jobs. So ladies and gents, thanks very much for attending, much appreciated. Paul, Dave, Heather, thanks for your input.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you all next week.
Bye everybody, take good care, thanks for joining
Bye.
Another 360 candidates since I last spoke.
us.
Yeah, good then.